Snow fell softly over the forgotten valley, burying roads, rooftops, and names no one spoke anymore. The kind of winter that doesn't shout its danger, only waits. After his wife died, a veteran came here carrying nothing but grief and a loyal German shepherd who refused to leave his side. He believed her story had ended in a hospital room under fluorescent lights and whispered prayers. He was wrong. Hidden in a silent town, erased by time, she had left something behind. Not money, not comfort, a truth someone wanted buried forever. When strange vehicles appeared in the snow and his dog began to sense what others could not, the veteran realized this was no place for the brokenhearted or the living. Why would strangers hunt an empty house? Why did the ground itself seem to shift beneath their feet? And why did his dog stand guard, as if protecting more than just his owner? Before we begin, please consider subscribing. Your support helps stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles reach those who need them most. Winter reached Briar Hollow early that year, pressing into the valley like a held breath, pale daylight thinning by afternoon, and so settling softly after dusk, as if the mountains were trying to bury names they no longer wished to remember. Briar Hollow sat tucked into the northern folds of Wyoming, a town that survived more by habit than hope. Its streets were narrow and quiet, its storefronts modest, its people shaped by long winters and short conversations. Sound carried strangely there. Footsteps echoed too clearly, doors closed too loud. Grief, when it arrived, had nowhere to hide. Merrick Sloan returned 3 days after the funeral. He was 48, tall and broad-shouldered, with the build of a man who had carried weight for years without complaint. His posture remained straight, even when exhaustion bent everything else. His face was angular, weathered by sun and cold. His jawline, sharp beneath a beard, kept short and practical, dark, with streaks of gray that had appeared faster in the past year than in all the decades before. His eyes were a muted brown, observant but distant, the kind that had learned to measure rooms, exits, and people long before learning how to rest. The war had taught Merrick how to survive chaos. It had not taught him how to survive quiet. Since coming home, silence followed him like a second shadow, filling the house at night, lingering in the spaces where another voice should have been. Elowyn Sloan had once filled those spaces without effort. Elowyn had died at 39, not suddenly, not cleanly. Cancer took her the way winter took leaves, slowly, persistently, without malice and without mercy. Chemotherapy had thinned her frame, softened her once strong posture, and stripped her hair away in handfuls she joked about losing. Yet her eyes had remained steady. Gray-blue, thoughtful, always alert, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. Even near the end, when her skin turned pale and her hands trembled, there was a guardedness in her gaze, a sense that she was holding something back, not out of fear, but intention. Merrick had wanted to ask. He never did. He told himself there would be time. Time, it turned out, was the one thing neither of them had. The house felt wrong without her, not empty wrong, like a structure built for two that resented being used by one. Merrick moved through it carefully, touching little, keeping his belongings contained to a single room as if spreading out might disturb something fragile. He slept poorly, waking at odd hours with the sensation that he had forgotten an assignment or missed a signal. Old habits, the doctors called them. He knew better. This wasn't the war following him home. This was grief, quieter and far more persistent. Hollis stayed close. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, large and powerfully built, with a thick black and tan coat that darkened along his spine and lightened across his chest and legs. His muzzle had begun to gray slightly at the edges, giving him a look of early authority. His ears stood tall and attentive, and his amber eyes missed very little. Hollis moved with discipline rather than excitement, every step measured, every pause deliberate. He did not bark unnecessarily. He did not wander. When Merrick sat, Hollis settled nearby. When Merrick paced, Hollis followed at a distance of exactly 2 steps, as if calibrated by instinct. They had met overseas, assigned to the same perimeter detail. Hollis had learned Merrick's rhythms the way some men learned prayers. When Merrick left service, the dog followed him without hesitation. There had never been a conversation about it. Some bonds required no language. On the morning the letter arrived, the snow had not yet committed. A thin dusting clung to the porch rail, and the edges of the road barely enough to whiten the world. Merrick stood in the kitchen, coffee cooling in his hands, staring out the window at the tree line. Hollis lay near the door, head resting on his paws, eyes half open. The mail slot clattered. Merrick flinched before he realized why. He had grown unused to unexpected sounds. He set the mug down and crossed the room. Most of the mail was forgettable advertisements, utility notices, a church flyer offering casseroles and condolences. One envelope stood apart, thicker, cream-colored. The paper felt worn, as if it had traveled farther than necessary. The return address read, State Property and Records Division. Merrick frowned. Official mail rarely brought good news. He carried it to the table and set it down, intending to open it later. Hollis rose immediately. The dog stepped between Merrick and the door, body angled slightly, ears forward. Not aggressive. Alert. Merrick paused, watching him. "What is it?" he murmured. Hollis did not look at him, his gaze fixed on the envelope. Merrick exhaled slowly. He picked it up, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter inside. The language was formal, clipped, the sort of writing meant to convey authority without warmth. Elwyn Sloan was listed as a prior purchaser of a residential structure in an unincorporated area. The property, recently flagged during a records consolidation, had no current claimant. As her surviving spouse, Merrick was entitled to review the file. The address was unfamiliar. The town name stood out like a bruised Cindergate. Merrick read the letter twice, then a third time. Elwyn had never mentioned owning another house. Not once. He searched his memory for hints, offhand comments, unexplained trips, moments of distraction, but found nothing solid enough to hold. Annoyance rose first, sharp and unwelcome, followed quickly by confusion. Why would she buy a house and say nothing? Why here? Hollis stepped closer, nose brushing the edge of the table, inhaling deeply. His body stiffened, not with fear but recognition. Merrick had seen that posture before, years ago, when danger had been present but unseen. He folded the letter carefully, as if the paper might bruise, and set it back down. "This doesn't make sense," he said aloud, though. The kitchen offered no reply. Hollis remained between him and the door, unmoving, a quiet sentinel, guarding against something Merrick could not yet name. Outside, the light shifted. Snow began to fall in earnest, thickening the air, softening the edges of the world. Merrick looked toward the window again, toward the trees beyond the yard, and felt a subtle pressure settle into his chest. He did not yet know what waited in Cindergate. He only knew that Elwyn had gone to the trouble of keeping it from him, and that Hollis, faithful and unerring, had decided the letter mattered. Merrick picked it up once more, this time tucking it into his jacket pocket. Hollis stepped aside at last, allowing him to reach the door. As Merrick pulled on his boots, the dog watched him closely, ears still lifted, as if measuring distance, time, and consequence. The war had taught Merrick to trust his instincts. Grief had taught him to doubt his judgment. Standing there with snow thickening and a name he did not recognize burning quietly in his thoughts, Merrick felt the first shift since Elwyn's death. Not hope, not resolve, but the uneasy awareness that something unfinished had found him. And this time, it was not willing to wait. 3 days later, winter committed itself fully. Snow fell with purpose now, not the hesitant dusting of before, but a steady muffled descent that erased edges and softened in distance. By day, the road disappeared beneath pale layers like old memories being carefully buried. By evening, wind rose and the pine branches knocked together with a dry hollow, sound bone against bone. Merrick drove toward Cindergate just after noon. The truck's tires crunched steadily, the engine noise swallowed quickly by the surrounding hills. The road narrowed the farther he went, asphalt surrendering to gravel, giving way to rutted earth packed hard by years of neglect. Rusted road signs leaned at tired angles, their warnings long irrelevant. A gas station sat shuttered at the crossroads, pumps, locked windows clouded with grime. Several houses slumped inward as if exhausted by waiting. This was not abandonment by disaster or drama. This was abandonment by time. Cindergate did not announce itself. It simply stopped trying. Merrick parked near the edge of what might once have been a main street. The silence struck him first. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that followed something being removed too quickly. Even the wind seemed cautious here, threading between buildings rather than pushing against them. Merrick stepped out, boots sinking into fresh snow, and felt the old reflex tighten his shoulders. He scanned corners, windows, doorways. Nothing moved. Hollis jumped down beside him, landing soundlessly. The dog's posture shifted immediately, head lower, ears rotating independently, tail still. He did not pull on the leash. He did not hesitate. He simply absorbed the place as if reading a language Merrick had forgotten. They walked past a collapsed storefront, its sign hanging by one bolt. Past a row of houses with curtains still drawn as though their owners had stepped out briefly and never returned. Merrick's breath fogged in front of him, and for a moment he imagined seeing another breath mingle with his just ahead. The thought unsettled him more than the emptiness. Elwyn's house sat beyond the last intact building, set slightly uphill near a stand of pines. It was a 2-story wooden structure, weathered but upright, its roof intact, its windows dulled by dust rather than broken. Snow clung thickly to the steps packed into the grooves like frozen foam. A narrow path led around the side toward a small detached shed at the back. Hollis stopped short of the front door. Merrick noticed immediately. "You good?" he asked quietly. The dog did not look at him. Hollis angled left instead, nose low, circling toward the broken fence line where boards lay half buried. He sniffed the ground carefully, then lifted his head and stared toward the shed. It wasn't fear. Merrick knew fear. This was recognition. "All right," Merrick said after a moment. "We'll look." Inside the house, the air was stale, but not rotten. Cold, yes, but dry. The floorboards creaked softly underfoot. A small kitchen opened into a living area furnished sparingly. Two mismatched cups sat by the sink. A folded blanket lay draped over the back of a chair. On a side table, a sewing kit remained open, needles still threaded, as if someone had intended to return within minutes. Merrick's chest tightened. Eowyn had been here, alone, sick, carrying something she hadn't shared. He moved slowly, touching nothing. Upstairs, the bedroom held a neatly made bed sheets tucked with care. No personal photographs, no notes. Downstairs again, he lingered in the doorway, the weight of the quiet pressing in. The house did not feel abandoned. It felt paused. Dusk came early. Light drained from the sky as if pulled away. Snow thickened, falling heavier faster. Merrick glanced toward the window. He had planned to leave before dark. He did not like being caught somewhere unfamiliar after sunset. Hollis growled low. The sound barely registered as noise, more vibration than voice. Merrick turned. The dog stood rigid near the back door, gaze locked on the shed. The growl ceased as soon as Merrick looked, replaced by stillness. Merrick hesitated only a moment before reaching for the flashlight. He pushed the back door open. Cold rushed in, sharp and biting. The beam of light cut through swirling snow, tracing the ground behind the house. That was when he saw it. A trail. Not footprints exactly. A shallow drag mark in the snow, uneven, but deliberate, as if something heavy had been pulled across the yard toward the shed. The edges were soft, already filling in, but it was fresh. Too fresh to ignore. Merrick felt the familiar surge of focus settle over him. Not panic. Preparation. They approached the shed together. Hollis moved ahead now, confident, silent. The shed door hung slightly open, its lock broken long ago. Inside, the smell changed oil metal, something faintly electrical. The flashlight beam swept across shelves lined with jars, a workbench cluttered with old tools, a generator pushed against the far wall. Then Merrick noticed the floor. One section of planks was cleaner than the rest, recently disturbed. He crouched, brushing snow and dust aside, fingers tracing the outline of a metal hatch set flush into the wood. His breath caught. Hollis sat beside him, alert but calm, as if this was exactly where they were meant to be. Merrick placed his palm against the hatch, cold but solid, too solid for a simple cellar. Before he could examine it further, a sound drifted in from beyond the tree line, low, mechanical, brief then gone. Merrick froze. Hollis's ears snapped forward. Another sound followed, an engine distant but unmistakable, a vehicle moving slowly, deliberately somewhere beyond the ridge. Merrick straightened. He did not open the hatch, not yet. Instead, he shut the shed door quietly and backed away, scanning the darkening tree line. Snow continued to fall, thick enough now to blur shapes and swallow sound. He retreated to the house, bolted the door, and killed the lights. Inside, darkness settled like a held breath. Merrick stood near the window, peering out through a crack in the curtain. Headlights appeared briefly between the trees. Not on the road. Off it. Hollis pressed close to Merrick's leg body, tense but controlled. Merrick felt his heart rate steady rather than spike. Training overrode fear. Whatever Eowyn had hidden here, someone else knew or was trying to find out. After several minutes, the lights vanished. The engine noise faded. Merrick exhaled slowly. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the dark, with his back against the wall, Hollis stationed between him and the door, both listening to the storm bury the town a little deeper. By morning, the snow would erase the trail. But Merrick knew now that Cindergate was not empty. It was waiting. Morning arrived reluctantly. The sky over Cindergate was a pale, undecided gray, and the snowfall had thinned to a light drifting curtain, as if the mountain itself were reconsidering how much it wished to reveal. The air was colder than the night before, sharper, cleaner, carrying the faint metallic scent that came after heavy snow. Merrick rose before dawn. He had not slept, not truly. He had sat against the wall with his jacket still on, listening to the building breathe, and to Hollis shift positions every so often, always between him and the door. Years of service had trained Merrick to read silence as carefully as noise, and the silence in Cindergate felt layered, weighted like something pressed down rather than emptied out. Hollis was already awake when Merrick stood. The German shepherd stretched, once muscles rolling beneath his thick black and tan coat, then fixed his amber eyes on the back door. There was no impatience in him, only certainty. Whatever waited in the shed had not changed overnight. They moved carefully through the snow. Daylight softened the town's edges, but it did not make it friendlier. The shed loomed behind the house, its roof sagging slightly under the new accumulation. Merrick paused at the threshold, scanning the tree line before stepping inside. No fresh tracks, No broken branches. If someone had been there during the night, the snow had erased their passing. Inside the shed, the smell of oil and cold metal lingered. Merrick knelt near the section of flooring he had noticed the night before. With gloved hands, he pried up the loose plank and pushed aside the frayed old mat beneath it. Dust lifted in a faint cloud, and there it was again, the metal hatch rectangular flush with the surrounding boards. Up close, its condition was unmistakable. While the tools on the shelves bore rust and neglect, the hatch was merely cold, its edges clean, the lock functional. Someone had cared for this. Recently enough to matter. Hollis positioned himself close, his body rigid, ears forward, a low tension humming through him like a drawn wire. Merrick rested one hand briefly on the dog's neck, feeling the steady strength there, then turned his attention to the hatch. The lock resisted for a moment, then yielded with a dull click. When Merrick lifted the hatch, a breath of air rose from below, dry, cold, and strangely neutral, as if untouched by the weather above. A narrow ladder descended into darkness. Merrick flicked on his flashlight and followed the beam down. The space beneath the shed was not large, but it was deliberate. The walls were lined with sound-dampening panels, aged but intact. A single work table stood against one side, its surface scarred by use rather than neglect. Shelving units held neatly labeled boxes and binders. A compact generator sat in the corner fuel line, disconnected, dustless compared to its surroundings. This was not a hiding place built in haste. It was a room designed to wait. Hollis descended partway down the ladder, then stopped sitting with his back straight and his gaze fixed on the room. He did not enter fully. That alone told Merrick more than any document could. On the table lay a notebook and an envelope. Merrick recognized the handwriting instantly. Elowyn's script was neat and economical, each letter formed with care, rather than speed, as if she believed words deserved patience. His chest tightened. He opened the notebook first. Inside were dates, maps, and clipped observations. Elowyn had documented Cindergate with the precision of an archivist and the caution of someone who knew she might not be believed. Decades earlier, a mining operation had moved into the valley under the promise of jobs and renewal. Geological warnings had been downplayed, test results altered. When subsidence began and groundwater contamination followed, the company withdrew quietly. Records were reassigned, mislabeled or sealed. Compensation never reached the families who needed it most. Elowyn had traced the paper trail back through zoning boards, private contractors, and shell companies that no longer existed in any official sense. She had noted patterns, names that reappeared under different titles, land parcels quietly repurchased and left dormant. This house was not a refuge. It was an anchor. Merrick reached the envelope next. He did not open it yet. Outside, faintly at first, came the sound he had heard the night before: machinery, the low, steady rhythm of engines at work. It was closer now, not loud but persistent, like a heartbeat carried through the ground. Hollis's lip curled slightly, a soundless warning vibrating in his chest. Merrick folded the notebook carefully and slid it into his pack. He tucked the envelope inside his jacket directly over his heart, then extinguished the flashlight. He climbed the ladder and closed the hatch, replacing the mat and plank as best he could. They had just stepped outside the shed when a voice cut through the quiet. "You're not from around here." Merrick turned slowly. A man stood near the edge of the trees, far enough away to avoid startling close enough to be deliberate. He was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a narrow face shaped by sharp cheekbones and a trimmed beard dusted with gray at the chin. His jacket was heavy and clean, not new, but well-maintained, the kind worn by someone who expected to be outdoors but not for long. His eyes were pale, assessing the gaze of a man accustomed to watching, rather than participating. "I didn't think anyone was," Merrick replied evenly. The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Name's Calder Wynn, survey contractor." He gestured vaguely toward the ridge. "We're running assessments." Hollis stepped half a pace forward, placing himself subtly between Merrick and the stranger. His ears remained upright, his posture calm but unyielding. Calder noticed. His eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Merrick. "Military?" he asked, nodding toward Hollis. "Used to be," Merrick said. Calder nodded once, as if that confirmed something for him. "You'll want to be careful poking around here." Old ground, unstable in places. His tone was conversational, but there was an edge beneath it, a practiced casualness. "I'll keep that in mind," Merrick said. Calder lingered a moment longer, his gaze drifting to the shed, then to the house. "Storm's coming tonight," he added. "Wouldn't want to get stuck." With that, he turned and disappeared back into the trees, footsteps quickly swallowed by the snow. Merrick did not relax until the forest closed behind him. His pulse remained steady, but something else had shifted. Elowyn had not been paranoid. She had been prepared. Back inside the house, Merrick finally opened the envelope. The letter inside was brief. "Merrick, If you are reading this, it means I was right not to wait. This place is not safe because it is hidden. It is safe because it tells the truth. I am sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I needed time to be sure. Trust Hollis. Trust yourself. Do not let them rush you. E. Merrick closed his eyes. Grief moved through him, then sharp and clean, different from the dull ache he had carried for months. Eowyn had not left him a shelter. She had left him a responsibility. Outside the machinery continued its steady pulse. Somewhere beyond the ridge, plans were already in motion. Merrick looked down at Hollis, who met his gaze calmly, as if waiting for the next command. The secret beneath the shed floor was no longer buried, and someone had noticed it stirring. Snow thickened as afternoon collapsed into evening, the sky dimming so quickly it felt as though daylight had been switched off rather than faded. The wind picked up from the north, driving sharp flakes sideways, stinging exposed skin in a racing depth. Cindergate vanished behind a curtain of white, its empty buildings dissolving into indistinct shapes like half-forgotten memories. The truck appeared just before dusk. Merrick noticed it from the kitchen window, a dark pickup with no visible plates idling at the far end of the road, positioned just beyond the reach of the house's weak porch light. It did not approach, it did not leave. It waited engine low and patient like an animal that knew its prey would eventually move. Merrick's pulse did not spike. Years of training had taught him that fear wasted time. He moved methodically, packing the binders and the notebook into a waterproof field bag, sealing the zipper twice. Eowyn's letter went into the inner pocket of his jacket, pressed flat against his chest. He shut down the generator beneath the shed and wiped the work table clean, leaving no obvious sign that the hatch had ever been opened. Hollis paced once, then stopped beside the back door, muscles taut beneath his thick black and tan coat. His amber eyes tracked the distant truck through the swirling snow. When Merrick slung the bag over his shoulder, Hollis let out a single sharp bark, short, controlled, unmistakable. Movement. The shed door swung open behind the house. Merrick glimpsed two figures through the snow, both men, both bundled in dark winter gear. One carried a flashlight, its beam sweeping wide and careless. The other moved with more purpose, head down, steps quick. They did not shout, they did not call out. They had not come to talk. Merrick did not hesitate. He reached the truck just as Hollis bounded around the back, teeth bared, now barking hard enough to shatter the stillness. Merrick threw the bag into the passenger footwell, slid behind the wheel, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life as headlights snapped on, carving two pale tunnels through the storm. The pickup at the end of the road surged forward immediately. Snow blurred everything. The road vanished beneath drifts, its edges indistinguishable from the surrounding ground. Merrick drove by memory and instinct, hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning for movement rather than landmarks. The pursuing truck closed the distance, its lights looming large in the rearview mirror, bouncing wildly as it tore over uneven ground. Hollis braced himself in the passenger seat, forepaws planted, wide body, leaning forward as if sharing the burden of motion. His gaze never left the mirror. He did not bark again. He watched. The wind howled, drowning out everything but the engine and the rhythmic thump of tires hitting packed snow. Merrick felt the road tilt slightly left and adjusted without conscious thought. He had driven worse terrain, under worse conditions. What unsettled him was not the storm, it was the precision of the pursuit. Whoever was behind him knew the road, knew how fast they could push without losing control. Ahead, a dark shape materialized too late. A fallen pine lay across the road, its branches heavy with snow, trunk angled low and wide. Merrick swore and slammed the brakes. The truck skidded violently, tires screaming as traction vanished. The world spun sideways in a blur of white and dark. The impact never came, but the truck slid off the road, instead dropping hard into a shallow drainage ditch hidden beneath the snow. The engine stalled. The pursuing headlights bore down on them. "Go," Merrick said, already reaching for the door. Hollis was moving before the word finished forming. He leapt from the cab, into the storm landing cleanly, then sprinted toward the trees opposite the road. He barked again, louder this time, running wide, drawing attention, making himself impossible to ignore. The other truck swerved, braking hard. Doors slammed. Voices rose, sharp, irritated, urgent. Merrick grabbed the bag and bolted into the forest on the opposite side, plunging between snow-laden pines. Branches clawed at his jacket. Snow swallowed his boots up to the ankles. He ran anyway, lungs burning, heart hammering, not with panic, but with focus. Behind him, shouts cut through the wind. Footsteps followed, uneven but determined. Merrick forced himself to slow just enough to think. He angled downhill, using the slope to mask his tracks, circling wide, rather than driving deeper. The forest closed around him, thick with shadow and drifting white. Visibility dropped to nothing beyond a few feet. Then came the sound he had been listening for. Hollis's bark, closer now, sharper, cutting through the storm like a signal flare. The dog burst from the trees ahead, Snow clinging to his chest and legs, eyes bright with urgency. He veered sharply at the last second, passing Merrick, then turned and charged back the way he'd come, barking furiously. The effect was immediate. Flashlights swung, voices redirected. Footsteps followed Hollis into the deeper woods. Merrick did not waste the opening. He moved fast but quiet now, slipping between trees, keeping low, using every scrap of cover. He reached a narrow ravine and slid down its side, letting loose snow bury his tracks. He crouched there, chest heaving, listening. The storm swallowed everything. Minutes stretched. The cold seeped through his clothes, numbing fingers and toes. Merrick's mind raced, calculating distance, timing odds. He did not hear Hollis return. He did not hear the men leave. The absence gnawed at him far worse than pursuit ever could. At last, a shape emerged from the white. Hollis trotted into the ravine tongue, lolling slightly, breath-fogging the air. He shook once, sending snow flying, then pressed his head against Merrick's thigh, grounding him. The dog's flank was warm beneath Merrick's gloved hand, solid, alive. Merrick closed his eyes briefly, relief sharp enough to ache. They did not return to the road. Instead, Merrick followed Hollis through the ravine, climbing until the forest thinned and a faint glow appeared ahead. A structure emerged, a low, squat building half buried by snow, its roof sagging but intact. A hand-painted sign hung crooked above the door, Grady's Auto and Tow. Inside, a single light burned. Merrick hesitated, then knocked. The door opened a crack. A woman peered out, shotgun cradled easily in her arms. She was in her late 40s, average height, lean rather than thin, with weathered skin and a sharp, angular face framed by dark hair streaked heavily with gray. Her eyes were steady, assessing the gaze of someone who had learned the cost of hesitation. "Closed," she said flatly. Merrick raised his hand slowly. Not looking for work, just shelter. Her eyes flicked to Hollis, then back to Merrick. The dog sat calmly, snow melting into a dark halo beneath him. She sighed and opened the door wider. "You've got about 5 minutes before I decide you're trouble," she said. "Name's Mara Grady." Inside the shop was cluttered but warm-smelling of oil and wood smoke. Tools hung neatly on pegboards. A battered radio murmured weather warnings from the corner. Mara leaned the shotgun against the wall but did not relax. "You running from something?" she said, not a question. "Yes," Merrick replied. She studied his face, then nodded once. "Figures." Merrick explained only what he had to, that someone was after documents, that they were close, that they knew the town. He did not mention Elowen by name. Mara listened without interrupting, her expression hardening. When he finished, she glanced toward the door. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "Men came through here a month ago. Same kind of truck. Asked too many questions, didn't like my answers." "What happened?" Merrick asked. She shrugged. "Nothing yet. That's what worries me." Outside, the wind screamed. Somewhere beyond the trees, engines revved and died searching. Mara gestured toward a back room. "You can wait out the storm here. But come morning, you don't stay. This place eats people who linger." Merrick nodded. He understood that better than she knew. As he settled against the wall, Hollis lay down at his feet, eyes never fully closing. The storm raged on burying roads, covering tracks, reshaping the land. The men would search. They would regroup. They would not forget. And Merrick knew now, with a certainty as cold and clear as the air outside, that running would not end this. It would only delay what Elowen had already set in motion. That night, Merrick and Hollis took shelter in an abandoned chapel near the edge of the neighboring town, a squat stone building half swallowed by snowdrifts. The roof leaked in places, but the walls were thick, built for endurance rather than comfort. Wind pressed against the structure like a living thing, rattling the warped wooden door. Snow plastered itself to the stained glass windows until the outside world vanished frozen into silence. Merrick sat on a splintered pew, shoulders hunched, breath shallow. Cold gnawed at him, but it was nothing compared to the tremor running beneath his skin, the delayed reckoning of flight fear, and the realization that the past was no longer content to stay buried. Hollis lay at his feet, body curled but alert, black and tan fur, dusted white amber eyes tracking every sound the storm carried. Merrick pulled Elowen's letter from his jacket with careful hands. He had read it before, but reading and understanding were not the same thing. The paper was thin-creased at the folds, carrying faint traces of her scent soap and something medicinal he could never quite name. He unfolded it again, letting the lantern light catch the ink. She wrote plainly. Elowen always had. She wrote that she had known time was narrowing, that the treatments had bought her days, not certainty. She wrote that she had found Cindergate years earlier while cataloging county land transfers, that the omissions in the records had unsettled her more than the mistakes. Patterns had emerged, land quietly reacquired, oversight, quietly waived consequences pushed outward until they belonged to no one. She bought the house not because she wanted it, but because someone else did not want anyone else to have it. She wrote that she had not told Merrick because she knew him too well, knew the way responsibility set into him like a hook, knew that after the war and after her illness he was already holding himself together with discipline and habit alone. She did not want this to be one more weight he carried while she was alive. But she trusted Hollis. She trusted that when the time came, the dog would lead Merrick where he needed to be, and that Merrick, once he understood, would choose not what was easiest but what was right. Merrick lowered the letter slowly. Grief moved through him again, but it was different now. It was sharp-focused, stripped of confusion. Eowyn had not abandoned him with a secret. She had prepared him for a choice. Outside, the storm raged until dawn. The chapel groaned and held. Merrick dozed in fragments, waking whenever the wind shifted or Hollis lifted his head. When morning finally arrived, it came pale and quiet, the storm having exhausted itself some time before first light. The roads were barely passable, but Merrick drove anyway. By mid-morning, he stood inside the county administration building, a low concrete structure that smelled of paper dust and burnt coffee. The receptionist, a woman in her early 30s, with tired eyes and hair pulled back too tightly, looked up as he approached, then glanced down at Hollis with visible uncertainty. "He's trained," Merrick said calmly. "He stays." She hesitated, then nodded, gesturing him toward a hallway lined with faded notices and outdated maps. The officials who met with him did not smile. There were 3 of them. The first was a man named Edwin Caro, late 50s, balding with a neatly trimmed mustache and wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. His posture was rigid, his suit pressed too carefully, the look of someone who trusted procedure more than people. The second was a woman named Loretta Haynes, early 40s, tall and spare with dark hair cut blunt at the jaw and skin worn thin by long hours indoors. Her expression was skeptical but not unkind. The third was a younger man who said little and took notes without looking up. They asked Merrick for permits, for credentials, for proof that his claims went beyond suspicion. Merrick did not argue. He opened his bag and laid out Eowyn's notebook, the binders, the maps. He spoke plainly without embellishment, explaining what she had found and why the records mattered. Caro listened with thin patience, fingers steepled, while Haynes leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she traced a finger along one of the marked parcels. At first it went nowhere. Then the phone rang. A maintenance supervisor from the outskirts of town reported a minor ground collapse near a residential well. Nothing dramatic, he said, but the water had turned cloudy overnight. Another call followed this one from a volunteer firefighter who mentioned heavy equipment operating outside, approved zones during the storm. Haynes stood. She crossed to the window, staring out at the gray sky as if she could see the land itself shifting beneath the snow. "Run the comparison," she said quietly. The younger man finally looked up, fingers moving faster across the keyboard. By afternoon, skepticism gave way to unease. By evening, unease hardened into concern. Inspection orders were issued. Survey teams dispatched. Operations in and around Cindergate were suspended pending investigation. Caro's voice tightened as he read the formal language aloud, but he did not object. Word spread faster than paperwork ever could. People did not believe Merrick because he spoke well. They believed because the ground did not lie. A shallow sinkhole widened near the outskirts. 2 more wells tested positive for contamination. An unregistered generator was found buried under tarps beyond the ridge. Each fact pressed against the next, until denial became impossible. By the end of the week, the project was officially halted. Cindergate did not come back to life. It did something quieter. It was left alone. Eowyn's house became a place of records and refuge. The basement room beneath the shed was secured, its contents logged and protected. The main house was cleaned, repaired just enough to be safe. Maps were pinned to the walls, shelves filled with binders instead of dust. When hikers went missing during late winter storms, search teams knew where to bring them. When the weather turned violent, the house stood open, its lights burning against the white. Merrick did not stay for recognition. He returned to simpler work, repairing fences, hauling wood, clearing snow for neighbors who now met his eyes when he passed. He slept better, not easily, but honestly. Hollis remained at his side, unchanged, steady as ever. Mara Grady visited once, bringing supplies without comment. She nodded at Merrick, scratched Hollis behind the ears, and left before thanks could be spoken. Spring came slowly that year. On the first day the snow began to retreat in earnest, Merrick stood on the porch of Eowyn's house and watched the valley breathe again. He felt the ache of her absence, but it no longer hollowed him out. It shaped him. Eowyn's love had not ended with her life. It had become instruction. Love, Merrick understood now, was not always about holding on. Sometimes it was about standing still when everything else told you to leave. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder or sudden wealth. They do not announce themselves with flashing lights or instant rescue. Sometimes the miracle is quieter and far more demanding. It is the courage to stay when leaving would be easier. It is the strength to protect truth when silence feels safer. In this story, God did not remove the storm from Merrick's life. He did something more subtle and perhaps more powerful. He placed Merrick exactly where he was needed, between danger and the innocent, between buried truth and forgotten people. The mountain held because someone listened. The town survived because one man chose responsibility over comfort. And a loyal dog listened when human voices failed. In our own lives, we often pray for God to change our circumstances. But many times, God changes us instead, giving us eyes to see what others ignore, hands willing to help, and hearts strong enough to carry more than our own pain. Love does not always end when a life does. Sometimes it transforms into purpose. If this story reminded you that faith can be quiet, courage can be lonely, and miracles can look like ordinary people doing the right thing, then this message was meant for you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story reminded you of in your own life. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles. May God bless you and your family. May He protect your steps, strengthen your heart, and guide you through every storm you face. And may you remember, when the world grows cold, sometimes you are the warmth He sends.